Today on the Human Centric Investing podcast, I'm joined by John Manganaro of ThinkAdvisor for an inside look at the financial services industry in the media. The tables are turned. We'll be looking at the industry from a slightly different perspective, from somebody who writes about it. Usually, John would be interviewing me, but today I'm interviewing him. We'll be hearing about his perspective on some of the topics that he's most interested in writing about, and also what he believes he can help financial professionals and their clients engage on in the future. So, without further delay, I'm really excited for you to hear about my conversation with John. John Manganaro is a senior reporter at ThinkAdvisor. His coverage focuses on all things retirement, with a special emphasis on the perspective of financial planning professionals and family wealth managers. Before joining ThinkAdvisor in 2022, John was a reporter and editor at Plan Advisor magazine.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Julie.
We're the hosts of the Hartford Fund's Human Centric Investing podcast.
Every other week, we're talking with inspiring thought leaders to hear their best ideas for how you can transform your relationships with your clients.
Let's go.
Welcome, John, to the Human Centric Investing podcast. I am so excited to have you here with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. It's great to be here. I'm not often a guest on podcasts. I more commonly host them, but I've been looking forward to this, and looking forward to sharing with the Hartford Funds audience a little bit about what I do and what ThinkAdvisor does.
Well, I was going to say this is quite a role reversal for me as well. Usually, I'm the one being interviewed, so this is very exciting to have the tables turned today. Maybe we could kick things off, John, by you sharing a bit about yourself and your background, and maybe a little bit about what you report on, and for our audience so they can get to know you, the human side of you today.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great, and I'm flattered to have been asked to participate, in the podcast. So, I'm my job title is senior reporter at ThinkAdvisor, and I specialize my coverage primarily on the retirement beat. But as you know, Julie, retirement is a huge topic, so it really gives me pretty much free range to write about many different issues. I'm constantly interviewing financial advisors to understand what they're, how they're running their businesses, how they're serving their clients. I get the opportunity to speak with, asset managers, record keepers, insurance companies. I also cover the Social Security Administration, the Department of Labor. So it's a really wide field that I get to cover, and I really like that part of my job. I get to speaking to the human side of things. What I like most about my job is just getting constantly to meet and speak with really interesting, smart people who are working on really interesting and important topics. So that, that's really what I get to do in the day to day. And I think in that sense, I'm lucky. It's journalism can be a bit of a tough field, but I feel like I've really found a good niche for myself. Going further back, I've been writing about the financial industry for about 12 years now. I'm closing in on my second anniversary with ThinkAdvisor. I started my career writing about the defined contribution plan industry for a separate publication, similar name, called Plan Advisor. It's unrelated to ThinkAdvisor, but that's really where I cut my teeth. And it's kind of an interesting story because I studied journalism in college, and really, I didn't really have any direct interest in finance or the financial services industry. I was really focused on politics and policy. I thought I wanted to be a presidential reporter, or maybe go to Washington and cover Congress. But I realized early on in my career that's it really wasn't the field that I wanted to cover. I wanted to sort of work in a space that felt a little bit more collaborative and less confrontational. So as you can imagine, covering politics and writing about policy can really be kind of tough. So, a long-winded way to say that I really enjoy my job, and covering the financial services industry has been extremely eye-opening for me. And as I said, it's a great field to cover.
That's fantastic. And I can't imagine that the political arena would probably be very draining very quickly.
Yeah.
When you think about the wealth management arena, and you named off obviously a whole host of topics, do you have a few favorites or some passion topics that you really that fuel you, if you will, when you have the opportunity to really dig in deeper, that are really kind of the ones that get you out of bed in the morning, if you will?
Yeah, yeah, no question. There's a couple that come to mind. The first is retirement income planning, which sounds a bit nerdy, but it's such a fascinating field because the I think you'd agree with this, Julie. The accumulation effort, right, for retirement and just saving and generating assets, it's somewhat complicated. You have to know about asset allocation. Stay the course. Don't panic whenever the markets turn south. There are definitely complicated aspects to saving for retirement and preparing yourself for retirement. But it really pales in comparison to the complexity that you hit when you are deciding to retire and actually trying to make that transition from accumulation to decumulation is the word I like to use. I'm not sure if it's actually a word or not. But yeah, and recently we've seen tremendous amount of academic and industry research on the topic. Really smart people in this field are working on this question all the time. How can we use technology, the skills of advisors, and the product development in the asset management field? How can we bring all those pieces together and really create sustainable retirements that people can actually enjoy? So, I feel like it's a really important topic. It's a little nerdy. Like I said, I'm constantly reading and writing about Monte Carlo simulations and different statistical methods to try to game out how people's retirement may look based on historical data versus return assumptions. So it's definitely a complicated topic, but it's something that I really enjoy writing about. And as I said, there's an amazing amount of research and thought work going on right now in that space. So I find myself constantly reading new papers coming out from the American College, the Investments and Wealth Institute. They're doing really really great work in that field. Part of the reason that and I love the human centric theme of this podcast. So sort of to speak to that, one thing that I hear about that troubles me, as a retirement reporter, is the fact that there's actually a lot of people in this country who have done a really good job preparing themselves for retirement. They just don't know how to live it. They don't know how to make that transition and start spending down. And there's a lot behind that, right? Because people are used to seeing the accumulation. They're used to seeing their account grow and grow over time, but it's scary whenever you see it starting to move in the other direction. So I think it's important to empower people, investors and financial advisors with the knowledge about how to spend and sort of live in retirement. So that's definitely a passion of mine. The other one, it's related, but it's Social Security claiming. That's also very complicated. I have the pleasure of working with some colleagues here at ThinkAdvisor under the ALM banner. That's our publisher. We have a number of guys on the team who do Social Security analysis, and lately I've been working with them to do a series of case studies about claiming and just showing predominantly that delaying is often the better thing to do. Right, you get a larger benefit, but on the human side, it's very difficult for people to sort of hold off on claiming. They think, this is my money. I'm eligible for it at 62, so I'm gonna claim because I don't, and oftentimes people have fear about where Social Security may be heading, and so they make the decision based on fear. They want to get their hands on that paycheck, now while I still can. That's something I hear a lot about. So I think it's very important to sort of write about both of those topics because they're extremely important, and there's not a lot of insight out there about how to spend in retirement. So
I
two
think you're
very
so
important
right.
topics.
And
Yeah.
I so appreciate the fact that I can feel your passion first and foremost, and so appreciate that you are writing about this. And I think we spend so much time as an industry, focused on the numbers, which are crucially important, of course, and
Yep.
the financial plan, which is also important. But there is so much emotion and the mental side, like you said, of that transition to retirement. And all of a sudden, when those bar charts on the statement start to shrink. I just had a conversation with my mom 2 days ago, and she said, I love it when my bar charts are going up on my
Right.
statement, but it really bothers me when they go down. And I said, well, stop looking, right?
Yeah.
Stop
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah.
Don't let it get you down. But it's so hard for people to make that mental and emotional transition. And how do you prepare clients? And it is just there's so much to our mindset and our emotions, and they all come together. And how can we continue to educate financial professionals and ultimately clients? And it all hangs together. And if we can all work together to tell the story and put the pieces of the puzzle together. It really does ultimately take a village to get that done. And I think we're
Yeah.
just touching the tip of the iceberg. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think it's really interesting. There was a survey that came out. I can't remember the firm off the top of my head, but a large asset manager. And they showed that something like two-thirds of people in this survey said they fear running out of money in retirement more than they fear death, which I think is just a really eye-opening finding. I think there's a lot to read into there. I wonder if really how true that is in a sense. But I think it's more of an expression of the anxiety that people feel about retirement. That because it is frankly a potentially a vulnerable time in life. Something else that we've written a lot about lately on ThinkAdvisor.com is just the expense of things like healthcare and retirement, the challenges of associated with long-term care needs. These are things that really loom large in people's minds. And speaking back to the research, one reason why I think it's so hard to plan for some of this stuff is that oftentimes, some people get really lucky and they don't end up needing nursing home care and they're relatively healthy until the end of their life, and things go really well. But there are other families that can do everything right, save, up to millions of dollars in your bank account. But if, a long-term care event strikes you at the wrong time in your mid or early 60s, you could have potentially decades of nursing home care, or, things that can drain even a successful retirement savings journey. So that's just the reality of our current system here in the States. So it leaves people concerned, rightly so. I think that's another passion topic of mine, Julie, to go back to your earlier question, is encouraging young people to get started early. And
Yes.
because it's so essential when you're facing these types of risks and concerns. Really, the only solution is to start saving early, get invested in the equity and bond markets, stay invested, stay the course for decades. And that's how you can prepare yourself for a successful retirement. There's really, if you wait to start, that it's really almost impossible to catch up. So I think it's very important to communicate that to young people.
Right. Time is certainly our friend in those cases.
Yep. Yep.
I'm curious, right now as we chat, what are some of the trends that you're following in terms of are there some specific stories that you're working on right now that you could share with us and maybe why you're working on them? Is it seasonal? Is it
Yep.
because they're something that maybe you've been working on for a long-term research project or any updates that maybe a peek into the tent for our listeners as to
Yeah.
what's on your docket right now?
For sure, for sure. One thing I'd say, just in general, at ThinkAdvisor, I have the I'm part of a great team, so I really get to learn from my colleagues. So we have reporters that cover pretty much everything that's of interest to the professional financial advisor community. So in that sense, I really feel like I'm a part of a team that's really covering a lot of great information. As I said at the top, my beat is retirement,
Mhm.
but that ranges into so many different things. Right now, I'm writing a lot about taxes because we're closing in on tax day. I just filed my own taxes yesterday or the day before, so there's a lot of content that I'm sharing about the opportunities that come with tax management. Kind of taking a tax smart approach to saving and investing for retirement. That it can range from very sophisticated techniques like using direct indexing and separately managed accounts to do tax loss harvesting. That's something that I've been writing about lately that is very important, and there's potentially a lot of opportunity there for advisors to deliver value to their clients by using some of those more sophisticated techniques both ahead of tax day but also on a year-round basis. But there's also the more straightforward elements of tax management, just considering diversifying across both traditional and Roth style accounts, remembering the fact that brokerage accounts can be quite useful for saving for retirement because you can often pay at the long-term capital gains rate instead of having to pay only ordinary income over time. So there's a lot to consider there, and I'm definitely digging into that topic at the moment. um, One thing is the Social Security policy debate ahead of the presidential election this year. It's a hugely important program in this country. Everybody knows that, and everybody agrees on that. The question is, how do we right the ship in terms of the finances? So that, I expect to be, writing a lot about Social Security more from the policy angle. I've been doing a lot of coverage, as I said, about claiming strategies and, optimal retirement planning. But, more and more people are writing to me asking about, what I expect to come, with this election and into the future, because the Social Security program, as you probably know, Julie, the primary trust fund used to pay retirement is, according to the trustees, is on track to, run out of funds by the, mid to early 2030s, at which time we're facing, potentially a 25% benefit cut, which is not a great outcome when it comes to, many people relying on the program either for, discretional spending in retirement or mandatory spending. A lot of people are in that situation. So that's definitely something that's on my radar, as we head into the end of the year. One thing I would encourage advisors to remember and to communicate with their clients is that, people are worried about the future of the Social Security program. They may not be coming into the meetings and, and raising it as their top issue, but, someone said this to me the other day. Even if your clients aren't talking about it, they're thinking about it. So you should probably be talking about it as the advisor. If there's one, message about the program that I think people need to understand, is that it's not going away. I think people, they hear about Social Security going bankrupt, and they, again, it drives them to claim early and make poor decisions. They think the program is going to disappear, and it's really not. If nothing happens, in terms of legislation, there will be a benefit cut, but the program isn't going to disappear. So I think people need to understand that, especially, as we can anticipate a pretty, heated election cycle coming up. I think we're likely to hear some pretty, dramatic statements on both sides about the
I'm
state of the
sure.
program. Yeah. So, as you can probably hear, I'm passionate about Social Security as well.
Yes. Well, obviously, it's a very, very important topic, and I think that's a very important statement that you made. Even if clients aren't talking about it in the meeting, they are thinking about it. They are worried about it, and maybe even fearful about it. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really important point you make, and
Yeah.
that actually leads me to my next question for you. What kinds of stories are resonating with your readers, and maybe what do they want to learn more about, and how do you find this out? I'm always curious about that as the person that's typically being interviewed.
Sure.
And maybe I'll even add an asterisk to that. How do you find out what they don't like or don't want to hear about? So maybe the flip side of that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. They're great questions. Yeah. So as I said at the top of the call, I really enjoy, I'm lucky. I really enjoy my job, and in the day to day, I get to speak and, talk with people who are doing really interesting things for organizations that are really important. A couple things to say, the power of LinkedIn right now in our industry is
Mhm.
not to be underestimated. People often go there first when they're, announcing their own successes in the industry. Maybe they're proud of a new product that's coming out, or they've worked on a new research paper, and they go to LinkedIn and tell people about it. And so I would, that's a place where I actually find, and it would probably surprise you how much of the news that I'm able to find comes from
Interesting.
LinkedIn, both
Okay.
the public side of LinkedIn, but also the chats. You can,
Hmm.
people, for whatever reason, maybe it feels a little bit more formal to email a journalist, from their corporate account. That feels, and frankly, that they may have restrictions on their ability to talk to the press in a formal
Hmm.
setting, but they have a private relationship with me on LinkedIn, and they can drop me a note and say, hey, this is off the record, but we're working on this. You might want to keep an eye out for it. And so I get to, a lot of scoops that way, if you will. So I've been
Hmm.
really trying to lean into that in the last couple of years, and cultivate that as a pathway to get, information. Um, and frankly, and speaking to the human side of things, journalism, and I think it's true in financial services in general, it's such a relationship business. And I think, establishing trust with people over time is, the most important thing when it comes to writing about potentially sensitive topics. I can think of an example. I won't name the specific firm, but there's, one large, it's one of the large wirehouses that is facing an issue with advisors who are, suing the firm or arbitrating with FINRA about deferred compensation. And, the firm is obviously they believe they're doing the right thing, and that their arrangements with their employees are as they should be. They live up to the law, they're properly structured contracts and all this. The advisors and their attorneys see things differently. And, it's my job to be able to speak to both parties fairly, and to understand, both sides of the equation, and then to write a story and just present the facts, and not pick a side. So that, but it can be challenging. I've, when I email the firm and say, hey, by the way, I'm writing about this lawsuit, what do you guys make of it? I figure you probably won't want to say anything on the record, but I'll look at your court documents and extrapolate from there. But please let me know what you think about this. And I get tough phone calls now and again. People, respectful, but just saying, oh, John, I really think these attorneys have it wrong. You have to look at it this way. And I, take their input into account, and just try to, right down the middle, essentially. So
Mm.
it can be challenging. I would say that I can't even think off the top of my head of a time, maybe once or twice in my entire career, where I feel like things have gone, poorly in terms of just getting on the same level as people, understanding their point of view. People working in this space realize the importance of being kind and being polite for the most part, and just realizing that, that's a better way. Even if there is a lawsuit that we're talking about, or a piece of regulation that people are really upset about, I mean, that everybody remains really respectful, and I think that's important. Different, as I said before, different from covering politics. It
Right.
feels different.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um,
Do you read all of the online comments that people make on your articles? I'm curious.
I try to, yeah, yeah. What's interesting is that, so we don't have, on the website itself, we don't have a comment section, but we
Okay.
do, in lieu of that, my email address is right there on every story. So people can, tell me exactly what they think, and they often
Hmm.
do. To give myself a bit of a compliment. I tend to get good feedback on my articles,
Hmm.
because I take the job very seriously. And,
Right.
I think it's important as a journalist to be very just cognizant of the fact that I do have a bit of a voice, and to realize the not the importance, I'm searching for the right word, but just the responsibility, I guess, of having a voice online. I think it's important to remember that. So yeah, it's a really interesting job. I enjoy it. One thing I'll say is that, when I welcome all feedback on my articles, the last thing I would want is for someone to see something that they know that I got wrong, and not tell me, because that getting things right is the most important part of the job. And no one's perfect. I make mistakes. Everybody does, and sometimes I need to correct an article, or usually it's very minor, but every once in a while you make a mistake, and you just have to. I think it's important to fess up to it. So
No, I agree. A great leadership coach once told me feedback is a gift, and without it, we have no opportunity to improve. So
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I agree with that.
I'm lucky. I have, not to, I guess I'm going to compliment my bosses on the podcast, but I have great editors. I've always had respect for my editors that I've worked with at
Hmm.
prior publications, but Katie and Janet really, they help me a lot, to make sure that my content is, is accurate, is relevant, is timely. It's, for example, the art of headline writing is something that, my editor Katie and Janet are very good at. I find them. I often turn my articles in with a pretty technical headline, and when I see it come online, I'm like, oh, that is a much better way to sort of hook people, and get them
Right.
into the story. So, yep,
And that's probably the most fascinating part of journalism to me are the headlines. I'm like, ooh, that sucked me right in.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that creative part of it, that I'm always so impressed with the minds that can come up with those headlines. So I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that.
It is a
I'm
different.
curious, so you mentioned obviously litigious type situations are challenging to cover, right? Where there are sort of two sides. Are there any other topics that, from your perspective, are difficult for you to cover? When you think about it, or is that really the main one where it's kind of involves more of a where two sides are sort of fighting, if you will?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Definitely. I mean, of course, the lawsuits, come to
Yes.
mind. In my prior publication, in the world of 401k plans and DC plans, the excessive fee litigation, there was a wave of
Hmm.
that, and so I felt like I was constantly writing about lawsuits, and it almost became difficult because at what point do you cover allegations versus actual developments in a
That's
lawsuit?
true.
Because you can anybody can allege anything in a filing, and so that was challenging. I don't deal with that quite as much in this job now because I'm more focused on the retail wealth management world. I do write about retirement plans in the context of retirement planning, but I don't write about the administration or litigation issues there. But we have a sister publication, if you will, called Benefits Pro, and I do feel for some of my reporter colleagues on that side of the aisle because they have to deal with this because it's a major trend in the 401k plan industry. Things have actually improved quite a lot, and I don't think the pace is quite as high as it was in years past. But that's something that comes to mind. Um, Almost the flip side of the answer, I think I'm lucky, Julie, because there aren't a lot of things that fall into that category for me, and it's because retirement is one of the very few truly bipartisan topics in our public discourse today. I talked about Social Security before, but when it comes to just the employer sponsored retirement plan system, our legislators in Congress are extremely supportive of the system. We've had you're probably familiar with the Secure Act from
Yes.
2019, I guess it was, really included a bunch of features that the industry has been pushing for, greater adoption of automatic enrollment, opportunities to invest in annuity type investments within retirement plans in a more in an easier way. And then we even had Secure 2.0, several years later. So in that sense, it actually is great that I don't find when I publish an article that maybe one side of the aisle or the other has a strong perspective, or I don't get accused of being partisan the way that many other journalists do, and it's a great thing. So in that sense, I think I picked a good beat, right? Because there's not a lot of really challenging things. I do. Sometimes I find myself reading, some of these reports that I mentioned earlier. New analyses of retirement income, and I have a decent mind for mathematics, but when it comes to the real deep statistics, I kind of have to rely on some of the experts. So you see some of these formulas and the
Yes.
stochastic regression, and that stuff can go a little bit above my head. So that I'd probably say that side of things can be challenging. But the good news is that there's so much more to write about than that. There's the whole human side, as we're talking about today. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind.
That makes perfect sense. I'm curious as you think forward, and to the future topics, what are some of those on your wish list, if you will, for some themes or storylines that you are looking forward to writing about in the future?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's just so many different things I could point to. One thing I'm personally interested in, and again, kind of thinking about the human side, I'm interested to see where the whole cryptocurrency and sort of
Hmm.
meme stock phenomenon goes, because I think that's you know I'm not going to give a personal perspective about the value of Bitcoin, but there's no question that there's this just desire for people to sort of catch lightning in a bottle, right? And I think that
Right.
says a lot about people's emotions and psychology when it comes to investing. So and there are other meme stocks you could point to. So I'm very interested in that, and just seeing where that goes in the future, because to me it's a bit heartbreaking to see people say, no, I'm not going to participate in my 401k plan and do the things that we know can help people be successful long term. They don't trust the system, so they're going to invest in Bitcoin because that's the future, and everything will be fine if I just get buy and hold some Bitcoin for the long term. So I think that's something that seems like it's sort of a side topic, but I think it just speaks to a really important dynamic that's sort of playing out. I'm also, there's so many other things I could point to. Again, the retirement income topic and where that goes, especially as the baby boomer generation enters retirement as really the first generation that has significant 401k plan wealth, and maybe less pension, maybe less of an access to pension. Maybe many boomers do have pensions, but many do not. And I think they're really the test case of the 401k plan system, and the ability of people to spend and sort of live in retirement. And of course, I couldn't, wouldn't be a good retirement reporter if I didn't mention the topic of longevity and how people's longevity continues to increase. One thing I think that's extremely important for financial advisors to grapple with is to realize that not only is the average life expectancy increasing, but their clients just, it's the sad, I guess the sad truth, they're healthier and wealthier than the general population. And so it's not appropriate to be doing Monte Carlo analysis that look at 87 as the projected longevity. It's 92, it's 95 for your clients. So that's something that's
Exactly.
extremely important, especially in the context of a couple. And this and so that's something I'm definitely going to be writing about. The great wealth transfer, first from, I think people often talk about money flowing from the baby boomer generation to Gen Z or millennials, but there's an interim step there. And it's the fact that many women are going to outlive their husbands in the future, and they are going to be the inheritors of this money before the next generation. And I think that's sort of a blind spot in the industry right now. I think a lot of advisors, they're thinking about next gen, but they're not thinking about exactly how that transfer of wealth is going to happen. So those are three things that I'm definitely tuned into when it comes to the mid to long term future.
Absolutely. Those are certainly things that we at Hartford Funds are thinking about as well. Not only how can financial professionals help their clients fund retirement, but how will they help clients think about what will they do with their time in retirement? Because as you said, it's no longer, maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years. It could be 30 or 40 or 50 years of
Yep.
retirement, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
the funding is just one piece of it, but how will I spend my time and stay safe in my home? And, all of those longevity related questions. So it's really exciting, but it's a
Yeah.
lot of questions to answer. So I
Yeah.
think
I
we've got
think
a lot of
it's,
work to do.
yeah. And that topic of like visualizing what life in retirement will look like,
Exactly.
it's
Or
not,
even life after work, right? Maybe we don't even call it retirement anymore. Maybe it's just life after work.
yeah. I like that phrase. I use it in my writing often because I
Yep.
think it sort of gives people more of an image of what it is life after work. It's not like, it's
Right.
not just one thing. It's your, yeah. I don't know. I think, just speaking on a personal level, I think I'm lucky to be covering this topic too, because it sort of forces me to grapple with some of the things that other people are able to put off thinking about. Right. So,
Yes.
I'm still relatively early in my career. I, hope and expect to have, decades of reporting left to go before I retire. But, I've had the opportunity to sort of think a little bit more about that. And I don't know, I guess I have enough hobbies and interests that I'd like to think that I'll be able to transition smoothly into retirement. But I don't know, my work is important to me, and it's an important part of so many Americans' identity. So it has to be considered.
You're so right. I'm my husband and I are thinking about the same things, and we don't have kids, so we're thinking about the caregiving thing as
Yeah.
well. And again, it kind of helps. I think we're all thinking about that maybe a little bit earlier, and if we can continue to spread the messaging and encourage others to think about it, I think it'll just help everyone maybe prepare and visualize. I love that how you use that word. So
Yep.
I'm curious. Maybe we can transition to a slightly different topic, and maybe this
Sure.
is a little bit of a selfish question. But when you sit down with a wealth management source, how can they be most helpful to you or to media in general? When conducting an interview, I always whenever I sit down, I try to be as prepared as possible and think through, as many different themes and topics and bullet points, and then at the end, I think, oh, I hope I gave them what they needed, but you don't really know. Just
Well,
could you share with our audience, what is most helpful to you when you're sitting down with someone and trying to extract information? Just because I'm sure many of our listeners probably do engage with the media from time to time, and
yep.
any tips or tricks that you have for our audience?
It's a really interesting question. I think, to begin with, Julie, like, that's a great approach, what you just described. Realizing that, and realizing that this is an important interaction, and that it's worth, you don't have to write a whole term paper ahead of an interview, but it's probably worth thinking about it a little bit.
Right.
I think a lot of people, there are people who have such expertise and experience in this industry that they can do things off the cuff, and it'll probably still be useful and interesting to the journalist, and be a mutually beneficial experience. But especially if it's maybe you're early on in your engagement with the media, it probably makes sense to do a little bit more of that formal planning and preparing what you're what you're talking to. On the flip side, I can think of certain executives or leaders in the industry who've been kind enough to share, their cell phone with me, and they don't mind if I just
Mhm.
give them a quick call for a quick take on something that's happening in the industry. So maybe the best way to describe it would be, just kind of understand what the journalist is sort of trying to accomplish. Is this sort of very formal or informal thing? What are some of the most important topics? I'd also say, in my experience, it's great to be, working with third party agencies, press people who
Mhm.
help make these connections.
Right.
Um, and, a huge amount of respect for the people who help in that sense, and the firms that work in that space. I would just say, if an advisor or a wealth manager source or whoever it is connected with, a person via a third party like that, feel free to bring more topics to the table, because I think
Okay.
there's a strategy that the third party press people use, and it's think of an interesting idea, and bring it to the table, and connect a journalist and a source, and that's great. But I think you could also see that connection as an opportunity to share more information, and so I always like to go through the questions that were planned in that type of an interview, but then also just ask, what else are you working on? What do you think I should know about your job and the day to day, or
Mhm.
what's something that you found surprising or exciting in the past 3 to 6 months? So I guess it's sort of similar to what journalists are told or what writers are told, which is write what you know. When you're coming to an interview, same thing, like share what you really know, and you never know if the journalist is going to find it useful or interesting, and if they don't, then so be it. It's just an opportunity to have a discussion. I can't.
That
I'm think
makes
Yeah,
sense.
thinking. I'm trying to think what other tips I could give. Usually, it's always better to have advance notice of things. I think the vast majority of journalists they value their trustworthiness and their ability to be professional, and so I often have the opportunity to get news in advance under embargo. That's extremely helpful, from our perspective, to be able to prepare ourselves to participate in the breaking of news. I think as a news website, we write a lot of content that is instructive and sort of analytical, but the most important stories from our perspective are when there is genuine news involved. So whether that's important people moving positions, big product or service launches, acquisitions, these more news events. Of course, we love to hear about them the day they happen, but if at all possible, we love to get that embargoed information. And I've never broken an embargo. I never will, and I think the vast majority of journalists are in the same boat, because our credibility is it's really the only thing we have. So if we're breaking embargoes, or
Yeah.
reneging on promises we've made to people, that's not a good way to go.
No, I hear you. I always say my word is my only currency, right?
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. I'm curious, when you have an interview and you're hoping to get, a piece of information or a sound bite that you need, and you just don't really get it. The interview ends, and maybe it wasn't the subject matter expert that you thought you were going to get, and you're coming up against a deadline. What do you do? Do you try to find another source? Do you miss the deadline? Do you scrap the piece? I mean, again, this is just all the things that are always swirling around in my head as I'm in that interview thinking, you know did I get
You're
them to where they needed to go?
yeah.
I
Well,
would be curious on your perspective.
you're very conscientious, Julie. I think there's a lot of
I overthink everything. That This is why at 2 a.m. there's a very, very much going on in my head. So it's a very scary place.
No. I think it shows that you have respect for the journalists and their time, and I
Well, I
frankly.
try. I can't even imagine sitting in your seat and the deadline driven, or and all the things that you're juggling. So that's why I always try to think, just trying to be respectful of your time
Yeah.
and all of the things you're juggling. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm always thinking about, is did that achieve the goal that you were trying to achieve, while being authentic to my point of view, right?
Of course.
Because
Of
there's
course.
a fine line, of course.
Yep. First thing to say is that I like working in the world of digital journalism, because yes, we have deadlines in a sense, but like early in my career, I was writing for newspapers, and there was a deadline. It was like if the content was not in by 5, or whatever the time was, there could literally be a blank space in the
Wow.
thing that's being printed. So those days were more stressful. Is
Okay.
definitely.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, maybe why I don't have any hair anymore. 'Cause the early part of
I
my
don't think
career.
I would either.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But so that the early part of my career, that deadline pressure was stronger. And that, now writing for a news website, it's more flexible, right? But of course, the flip side of that is balancing the ability to delay and seek that next source or take that next step in the reporting versus the timeliness of your coverage. And Google is very it loves the first story on a new topic. So that's something, that all
Oh,
journalists
okay.
need to keep in mind. It really, the time matters of when you publish. So like for example, if there's a big acquisition that's announced by a firm, it matters in terms of the traffic, who is covering it first. Even if the stories are very similar, it's Google does care which one came first, because I think the way the algorithm works, it views that as the original content, and it sort of is seeing and ranking everything else as sort of a copy, even if it is original reporting. So that's the pressure these days. So it's less of a specific deadline and more of that give and take between having original high quality information and being early to the subject. So that's sort of
Interesting.
how the deadline pressure works in the online news world at this moment. When it comes to, if an interview doesn't go all that well, there's if it's not a really newsy, time sensitive subject, no problem. I'll call someone else tomorrow, put that on the back
Hmm.
burner. And it's again, if I think most journalists enjoy speaking with people and talking about topics. So even if it's not 100% what they were expecting, that very rarely, I think, does a journalist leave a conversation and be like, oh, what a waste of time. Like that really doesn't happen. There's at least I always try to get value out of the conversations that I have. And I feel like at the very least, I view it as an opportunity to, deepen that relationship. Maybe there's an opportunity to break news in the future, with this person. So, um, in terms of, if there's something that I really need to get information about, can't be afraid to call somebody back and ask. Sometimes it's sort of embarrassing, and you don't want to
Hmm.
have to do it. It can be a little embarrassing, frankly, to call up and say, I know we just spoke, but my editor really needs me to pin you down on this. I guess that's a little trick, and maybe this could be used in other people's walks of life too. But often you can pin it on the editor, right? I can call someone back and say, oh, my editor really wants me to figure this out, and you can sort of create that little distance. You can say, like, I know you don't want to talk about this and that it's sensitive, but my editor's really hounding me to get the information. So can you help me out? You kind of make it, you're not playing with their emotions in that sense, but you're, kind of demonstrating that there's, it's important, and I really want to get this information if you can share it. And the most important thing is, if I ask somebody for something twice and they don't give it to me, then that's it. I'm not going to hound them for information, because they're, in this, it's a sensitive field. A lot of people are subject to literally regulatory restrictions on what they can say, and when and how they can disclose information. So that's something I try to keep in mind.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Well, my final question is from your perspective, why is media important? I know from our perspective in the wealth management industry why it's so important, but we would love to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear, why it's important from your perspective. And then after we hear your answer, maybe we could transition into our lightning round of questions, which is our
Sure.
very special segment, to get to know you a little bit better on a human centric level. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that in one moment. But what are your thoughts on kind of the importance of media, and I guess maybe why you do what you do? What is your why?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and you would think that I would have a really insightful or specific answer to that, but I don't know. I mean, I think a couple things to say. Number one, it's a the media, is a huge thing, right? So I think, for example, the role that I play at a publication like ThinkAdvisor is very different from, say, a national reporter at the New York Times who's covering the election. What I'm sort of in more of a niche world where I see my role as as a a communicator and a connector, really. So some of the most important things that I get to do, I think, are participating in podcasts like this or hosting webcasts where I can really bring together experts and encourage a dialogue amongst themselves and really showcase their expertise, because in this space, the things that people can do, the skill sets, the financial planning skill sets that people have are extremely important when it comes to people's long-term financial success and happiness. And so I kind of view my job as sort of just helping to share that information, right? It's almost just to convey the information and the expertise that they have. So, ThinkAdvisor, you could probably classify it as a trade publication, as the term used to be, or an industry publication. So I think our role should be thought of a little bit differently. It's definitely more of a. I think I said at the top of the call, Julie, that I really feel like, for example, ThinkAdvisor and an organization like Hartford Funds, we have many similar goals, right? It's educating people, it's helping people to participate in the markets, it's helping financial advisors find success so that they can help their clients find success. So it's I really see our role that way. It's not a confrontational sort of model. It's and I think there's a role for that. There's an extremely important role for investigative journalism, for war correspondence, all these, there's really important work that those people are doing. My world's a little bit different. It's more of that, trade publication style, where we're really, getting really close relationships with our sources. That's something that I think is important in my space. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, I mean, I'm hugely passionate about the importance of media and the First Amendment, the open communication. I think it's all extremely important.
Well, thank you for the work that you do and for sharing your passion with all of
Sure.
us and for educating us and connecting us to all of these topics and resources that ultimately make us better at our jobs every single day. It really is important, and we appreciate what you do and your
Yeah, thank you.
commitment to the
that's
professionalism. So
that's the goal.
it
That's the goal.
doesn't
Yeah.
go unnoticed, that's for sure. But as I mentioned, we would love to take you into the lightning round segment of our human centric investing podcast. And
Alrighty.
these are just some fun questions, nothing business related, just to know you, John, as the person. So
Sure.
if you're willing, I'll just go through some questions, and if you just want to answer with whatever's top of mind, and we'll just get rolling if
Let's
you're
do it.
willing.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a driver are you?
Oh, 8.
I'll take it.
Confident. For context, I live in New York City and drive in this place all the time. So you have to be on your game for
There we
sure.
go. I love it. Okay. What's your favorite holiday?
Gotta be Thanksgiving, I think. Less pressure, no gifting, but family and food.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I very much like that. What's the best age?
Well, right now I'm 34 years old. I'll disclose that. I'm enjoying this time in my life. I feel like I've at this point you kind of well, first of all, I've been able to pay down my student loans, so that's a good feeling. Second of all, I feel like I've got to the point in my career where I am able to participate in things like this, and I have a little bit of momentum that I think everybody's searching for when they're a little bit younger. So I like where I'm at.
Absolutely. I think that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
What's the ideal outside temperature?
Let's say 60, 65, a little maybe cooler than other people would say, but
Oh, that is a little cooler than most
yeah,
say.
I love to ride my bike, and I commute to work on my bicycle as much as I can. And so that's a good temperature for not being cold on the way to work, nor breaking a sweat on the way to the office.
Perfect. Would you rather binge watch a TV show or watch a movie?
Probably binge watch a TV show. I'm a bit. I don't know. These days, it's hard to watch. Like, for example, the new Dune movie that came out. My wife went to see it and was extremely excited. I skipped it because I know that I can't sit there for that long and watch something. I love the Dune universe. Read all the books, but just
Yeah.
the movies these days are getting longer and longer. It
They
seems like.
are. It is amazing.
Yeah.
It is amazing. And I think our attention spans have changed to
Yeah.
these.
Well, exactly. I
I would
could sit
agree.
down and watch many episodes of something, or if I'm cooking,
Exactly.
can
No,
have it
it's
on in the
really
background.
interesting, but I'm with you. I sometimes see the movie is 3.5 hours long, and I think, I don't know that I can do it. It's almost
Yep.
like I've checked out before I've ever even sat down.
Yep.
Do you prefer a beach house or a lake house?
Beach. Love the ocean. Yep. Had the great pleasure of going to the Holden Beach in North Carolina with my family last summer, and it was amazing. Wouldn't
Oh, that sounds
yeah.
fabulous.
Swimming in the ocean is can't beat it.
Would you rather travel to the past or to the future?
Ooh, good question. I suppose the future. I suppose the future. Thinking about some of the topics we talked about earlier, longevity,
Exactly.
AI, these questions, technology. So I got to say the future. A lot of ways our society could improve upon itself. So hopefully we'll see that.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Probably a pilot. And in high school, I was extremely passionate about chemistry, and my chemistry teacher was just fantastic. And so I thought I wanted to be a chemist, and until my mom bought me a notebook, when I was I think 18 years old, and for
Hmm.
whatever reason, I just started journaling, and that changed my life. Honestly, I fell in love with the written word, and I started reading great classic novels, and then all of a sudden I just found, I went from wanting to be, a Nobel Prize winning scientist to being like, the next Jack Kerouac or whatever. So
That is unbelievable. That's
yeah,
a great story.
yeah, it's true. I still have yet to write a novel, but it's on the to-do list.
Incredible. Well, I'm confident that you'll do it.
Oh, thank you.
And our final question today, what's the first concert that you ever went to?
It would be a band called Gaelic Storm, which they're kind of popular. It's an Irish rock band, but my grandmother, my late grandmother, Mary Kay O'Neill, was Irish and loved Irish music. And I think when I
Oh,
was probably 10 or 11 years old, she took my twin brother and I to see Gaelic Storm. Funny, really random story. I was asked that same question in a group with other people, and one of my current work colleagues had the same experience, same band,
oh my
went to see
gosh.
them with their grandparents, and that was kind of freaky, but yeah,
That is.
great band. I'd recommend people check them out.
And what a special memory. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Special memories of special grandmothers. Well, that's great. Well, John, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insight today with us on the Human Centric Investing podcast. And for our listeners who want to read more of John's work, you can check out his full coverage at thinkadvisor.com/author/profile/John-Manganaro. Thank
yep.
you again, John, for all of your time today out of your very busy schedule. And I'm sure you have a deadline to make. So we will let you go and get back to that.
Yeah. I got one or two stories to finish today, but this was great, Julie. I love the human centric theme. And I appreciate your lightning round questions. That was fun. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Hartford Funds Human Centric Investing Podcast. If you'd like to tune in for more episodes, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube.
And if you'd like to be a guest and share your best ideas for transforming client relationships, email us at guestbooking@hartfordfunds.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Talk to you soon.
The views and opinions expressed herein are those of the guest who is not affiliated with Hartford Funds. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. Fixed income security risks include credit, liquidity, call, duration, and interest rate risk. As interest rates rise, bond prices generally fall.